I am going to read Cameo 1 today in A Course in Miracles, complete and annotated edition, 2017 by Circles of Atonement, Robert Perry. Cameo 1. This is not a selfish gift. And this is an appendix 1 in the back of the book. Cameo 1. This is not a selfish gift. In June of 1965, after years of conflict in their professional lives, Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford joined in the goal of demonstrating another way, which they hoped would transform their working relationships. This triggered in Helen that summer a series of startling inner visions and paranormal experiences. Then, apparently toward the end of that summer, she made what turned out to be a prescient announcement. One day during that same summer, I told Bill I was about to do something very unexpected. I had no idea what it was, but I knew it was going to happen soon. At Bill's urging, I had been keeping a sort of diary since our visit to Virginia Beach. Now Bill suggested that if I wrote down whatever occurred to me in connection with the unexpected something, I might find out what it was. 41. Okay. It says all quotations with page number references in this cameo are from Helen Cohen Schuckman, Ph.D. autobiography. Temecula, California, Foundation for Inner Peace, 1990 and 2009. And I apologize for moving. My dog is laying on me, and she's needing attention. Okay, so therefore, she'll knock into me, so you might see it shake a little bit. Therefore, sometime around October 18th or 19th, Helen began writing down anything that seemed relevant. She said in her autobiography, "Nothing much came of my attempts at first, and I was on the point of giving them up." But actually, these early writings clearly reveal a spiritual impulse that was trying to emerge into consciousness, like a new shoot just starting to push through the soil. She records spiritual reflections that do not at all sound like musings of a self-professed militant atheist. I think under the projection and all the stuff is a hidden nostalgia for the soul. We want it back so we can identify with it because that is what we really are, and somewhere we know it. All quotations without a page numbers in this cameo are from Helen's notes. Throughout these cameo essays, we have corrected spelling errors in the notes for ease in reading. No, honey, stop. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. This AM, it occurred to me that I had no right to waste anything. Stop it, Greta. Stop. Money, clothes, or my own life, because thus everything has to be used right. It all has a place in the plan, and you must not throw gifts away. Lay down. It seems clear that these thoughts are coming from somewhere beyond Helen's conscious mind. Indeed, an insight she writes down regarding her tendency to forget names. It may be more of a fear of involvement or interaction, is later identified by the Course's author as coming from him. I emphasize again that your tendency to forget names is not hostility, but a fear of involvement or recognition. 3. See our discussion of this in Cameo 9, so we'll come back to this thought. She records dreams with obvious spiritual content. In one account, she says, the crucifixion was a total rejection of the body by others, projection, and its destruction, which was really a purification. As a result, the soul could enter entirely into the temple, heal it, and use it only constructively. So the crucifixion was a total rejection of the body by others' projection, and its destruction, which was really a purification. As a result, the soul could enter entirely into the temple, heal it, and use it only constructively. She also records prayers, including a long, impassioned prayer for Dave Diamond, a friend who is dying from brain cancer. This prayer is infused with ideas that will later appear in the Course, as we can see in these excerpts. Dave, don't give in. You have a real mission. Don't lose your chance. Miracles are the natural law. Then I asked Christ to help Dave know he was there and to see him and know the truth so he could be free. Your spirit and mine can unite, and then two of us have come together in Christ's name. Jesus promised to be there, Dave. Your brain does not matter if you will understand life as Jesus did. Finally, sprinkled throughout these writings, she records statements from a voice that speaks as if it is Jesus and that Helen calls Christ. I was really quite depressed this AM, which is now very unusual. I used to be all the time. But he says, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. Then, on October 20th, everything changed. The voice, which we will call by the name that it later gave itself, Jesus, and then it says, see the issue of authorship for more about this. See the issue of authorship. All right, so, which is where I left off before I started to read this Cameo. All right, and where was I? The voice, which we will call by the name that it later gave itself, Jesus, went from showing up in occasional brief statements to delivering a more extended discourse. And this discourse, which was specifically about Bill receiving guidance and Helen asking on his behalf, became the jumping-off point for the dictation of a course in miracles. Earlier, Helen had written down the following items. Ask what is interfering with Bill's meditation and how to overcome this, and Bill's list. Now, on the days before the course would begin coming through, Helen returns to these two items, the first of which is specifically about Bill's ability to hear guidance in meditation. He has apparently been wondering how he can access a gift like the one Helen has stumbled upon. Here is the question that she asks of her guidance. I said he promised to come when he was called on, and Bill asks for guidance and does not receive, and has really tried to knock, and it has not been opened to him. I think the door is ajar a bit, but I really wouldn't call it very open. Is it all right if I ask you for him, since he wants me to? Before recording this question, Helen had actually started to write down Jesus' answer. She wrote, 1. If you do not get an answer, it is always because you ask amiss. But then cross this out. Now she writes his answer down in full. I can't answer when he asks amiss. When he asks right, I have answered. He has a tendency to get part of an answer and decide himself when to disconnect. He should ask if that's all. Since I don't know when he's going to ring off, I have to be very short and even cryptic. It chops messages up too much. The main problem then is that Bill is too quick to hang up the phone, so to speak. Now Jesus elaborates on further areas of interference. There is also interference from three major areas, the first three items on the numbered list that follows. 1, he doesn't have much real confidence that I will get through. He never just claims his rights. He should begin with much more confidence. I'll keep my promises. The writing now apparently switches to Helen speaking to Bill, but you do not ask if you really expect him to. This attitude of asking with confidence as if claiming a birthright is the same attitude encouraged in the workbook's instructions for listening for guidance. For example, there is a message waiting for you. Be confident that you will receive it. Remember that it belongs to you. There is another kind of related error which is illustrated by his question about when are you going to call the hospital. It's not right to interfere just to check. It's selfish, but more than that, it makes things too personal, which always implies doubt. Without knowing what the call to the hospital is about, it's hard to be sure what this means. Jesus mentions this situation later, saying, remember your slip about the effect on Neurological Institute and Bill's, asking when you were going to call up. Whatever the details, Bill is being interfering and even selfish due to his own lack of trust. The implication may be that Bill's asking for inner guidance at times has the same quality. This might be a clarification of the earlier idea that Bill sometimes asks amiss. 3, he has to learn better concentration. His mind flits about too much for good communication. Suggest a very short phrase like, here I am, Lord. And now, addressing Bill directly, don't think of anything else. Just pull in your mind slowly from everywhere else. Stop it. She is just annoying. Just pull in your mind slowly. Stop it, honey. From everywhere else and center it on these 4 words. And 4 is crossed out. Lay down, honey. Lay down. Here Jesus gives Bill a meditation technique which involves putting all of his attention on being fully present to God and on nothing else. The idea is that this kind of concentrated focus on God will help Bill hear guidance. This, too, is a foreshadowing of the workbook. It anticipates the workbook's meditation instructions, which sometimes involve making oneself fully present to God. See Lesson 183, for example. And it anticipates the workbook's training in stilling one's mind in order to hear guidance. His voice awaits your silence, for his word cannot be heard unless your mind is quiet for a while and meaningless desires have been stilled. 4. Tell him to be sure not to mistake your role. If he overreacts to or over-evaluates you as a person, both of you will be in danger. Bill already feels that he lacks his own access to God. If he puts Helen on a pedestal as a spiritual idol, he will further denigrate himself and dangerously inflate her. He should try to get his own list. Armstrong may just mean his own own arm is strong. He should try to get his own list. Armstrong may just mean his own own arm is strong. Alrighty. I feel like this is kind of all over the place, but the nature of Bill's list is not specified, but from what little we know, it seems very similar to Helen's list, which is discussed in the notes just days later. 5, see Cameo 3, which we'll get to all those. Her list is a list of people selected by guidance who have thrown away their chalice of atonement, their reconciliation with God, and who need Helen's help to get it back. She has been assigned, in other words, to hand them back their own chalice. Like Helen's list, Bill's list is also apparently a list of people in that someone named Joe Armstrong is twice mentioned in connection with it. And like Helen's, it seems to be a list revealed by guidance in that Helen appears to be asking Jesus, who is on Bill's list? However, rather than hearing the names of those on Bill's list, Helen gets a very different message. He should try to get his own list. The name Armstrong is then apparently turned into a pun in which Bill's arm is strong enough for him to get his own guidance. When it comes to guidance, in other words, Bill can rely on his own strength. He shouldn't be leaning so heavily on Helen. This somewhat curt guidance may sound quite definite, but it will soon be reversed. Jesus' discourse on Bill's hearing ends at this point, and things take a dramatic turn. It's as if during this guidance something has been building in the background, and it is now ready to break through. But before it can do so, Jesus needs to explain to Helen the bigger picture. He, Jesus, thinks it's time for some explanations, which we're probably ready for. There are always risks in speed-ups. The whole thing was undertaken because things were getting behind schedule because so many people persistently lost more than they gained. Helen, later in her autobiography, fleshed out the thoughts that rapidly entered her mind at this point. I was giving a sort of mental explanation though, in the form of a series of related thoughts that crossed my mind in rapid succession and made a reasonably coherent whole. So I was giving a sort of mental explanation, though, in the form of a series of related thoughts that crossed my mind in rapid succession and made a reasonably coherent whole. According to this information, the world's situation was worsening to an alarming degree. Stop it, Greta. People all over the world were being called on to help, and were making their individual contributions as part of an overall prearranged plan. I had apparently agreed to take down A Course in Miracles as it would be given me. The voice was fulfilling its part in the agreement, as I would fulfill mine. I would be using abilities I had developed very long ago and which I was not really ready to use again. Because of the acute emergency, however, the usual slow evolutionary process was being bypassed in what might be described as a celestial speed-up. I could sense the urgency that lay behind this explanation. Whatever I might think about its content, the feeling was conveyed to me that time was running out. So I could sense the urgency that lay behind this explanation, whatever I might think about its content. The feeling was conveyed to me that time was running out. Finally, it is clear what has been happening to Helen. Before her birth, she had agreed to enter this life in order to play her part in a global plan to restore humanity's forward progress. And this agreement, after slumbering for decades, has at last stirred to life. Receiving this information is a turning point, but instead of the process now rolling forward, things come to a grinding halt. Helen now writes this message from Jesus in large letters in the center of the page. Stop. Clearly something has temporarily gone wrong. This leads Helen to offer to tear it all up. I'll tear it up if you want. Jesus, no, maybe tomorrow. Now just write this. Remember your slip about the effect on Neurological Institute and Bill's asking when you were going to call up. Without more context, this is a very opaque comment. It is obviously another reference to Bill's question, when are you going to call the hospital? But more than that, we cannot say. Now, Helen writes an even more empathetic message from Jesus. Be careful. We can tell this caution comes from Jesus since he repeats it in his next comments. The reference to Jonathan is to Helen's husband, Louis, whom she also called Jonathan in the notes. Also tell Bill about Jonathan's remark, I do not like you all sweetness and light. I like you a little sharp, if you get what I mean. And again, be very careful. Something is clearly wrong. Helen has been told with great emphasis to stop and be careful, and then again be very careful. Helen even offers to tear it up if you want. The overall implication seems to be that Helen is in danger of proceeding inappropriately. But in what way? Lay down, Greta. She's driving me crazy. A lesson in forgiveness. Lay down, silly. To understand this, we have to look at the major temptation Helen had faced up to this point. In the summer, she had discovered that she had psychic abilities. About this, she reported, I was actually becoming rather proud of the acquisition of such dramatic abilities, and I even caught brief glimpses of fantasies of power and prestige crossing the back of my mind. This was the major obstacle she had faced in the run-up to the course, her ego being inflated by her newfound abilities. This obstacle was shifted by two pivotal experiences, both of which Helen marked as crucial turning points in accepting her function. In the first, she had a psychic vision of a church she was sure she and Bill would see when visiting the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. This, however, turned out to be a useless application of her abilities, as Bill discovered that the church existed but had been razed long ago to make way for the clinic itself. The true use of her abilities came out on the way home, when she was able to intuitively feel waves and waves of misery going through a young woman in the airport. This far more practical use of Helen's psychic abilities enabled her and Bill to render critical service to this woman at a turning point in her life. The Mayo Clinic experience was followed by and apparently led to an inner vision in which she discovered an ancient scroll on the floor of a cave. See Cameo 32. As she unrolled the scroll, she saw that the center panel said simply, God is. Opening the scroll further, she saw tiny letters begin to emerge on the right and left panels. She was told that on the left side she could read all of the past and on the right side all of the future. Helen, however, chose to reject the reading of past and future and stick with just the center panel. This represented a key decision to use her abilities only for God, not for psychic feats. Helen seemed to have believed that this was where she really accepted her function as scribe of the course. The road to accepting her function, then, had been one of repeatedly refusing to use her unusual abilities to fuel her ego, and instead giving them to God to use to help others. Returning to our account of the late October dictation, it is probable, then, that as she stands on the brink of actually beginning her function, she is facing some version of this same choice again. The particular way in which her ego wants to control her abilities becomes clear in what she writes the next morning, the morning of October 21st. It crossed my mind last night that something very wrong had happened. I got mad because I thought I shouldn't be asked to ask for you, Bill, and it was a form of exploitation that was very dangerous for me and represented an avoidance technique for you. I thought the whole thing was so dangerous that I had to tell you not to do it again. Briefly, it crossed my mind, but with no emotional impact at all, which is always suspicious, that I might just resent that I might just resent asking for someone else because I prefer the exclusive idea. Here it is. Helen now identifies what had gone so wrong last night. Her suspicion that it was dangerously unhealthy for Bill to ask her for guidance was actually the voice of her ego wanting her to keep this gift as her own private treasure, as a spring that only she could drink from. As the dictation proceeds, Jesus now elaborates on this. Christ says I can tell something is wrong whenever I get a snappy answer. He wouldn't say, tell him to get his own list that way. The tone is wrong. So, that fifth point that Bill should try to get his own list was in fact in error. It was a distortion introduced by the exclusive idea. Helen's urge to keep her gift to herself is warping her hearing, turning Jesus' voice into something snappy, and even, as he will later say, mean. This seems to solve the puzzle of why Jesus told her to stop and be careful. He can hardly proceed to dictate the course to her if her ego is taking control of her gift and distorting his voice. This morning, it was very clear to me that in connection with you, Bill, I have not been right since I asked you what you wanted, so I could really be asking for you. This was essential, and except for the list where I slipped, the answer should be respected. Instead of asking on Bill's behalf being very dangerous and an avoidance technique, it is, in fact, essential, and except for that point about Bill's list, what she heard was indeed accurate and should be respected. You have every right, in fact, you should ask me to ask for you. This is not a selfish gift. It is a real one. This upsets me too. It has to be used for others, and particularly you. Jesus, ask Bill, please, to help you get over being mean about it fast. Note, at the moment I have serious doubts about everything. This is holding everything up. Here, on the cusp of the course dictation actually beginning, Helen seems to have faced another version of the choice she made in the Mayo Clinic experience and in her scroll cave vision. In the face of the temptation to keep this gift exclusively for herself, she apparently decides with Jesus that this is not a selfish gift. She decides to use it for others, and particularly for Bill. She decides to fulfill her agreement to help the world situation. With this key decision made, it's as if the final barrier has been swept aside. Helen now writes this message from Jesus. You will see miracles through your hands, through me. This is the first line of what will become the miracle principles. The dictation of a course of miracles has begun. You will see miracles through your hands, through me. And this is in Appendix 1, Cameo Essays, and this is Cameo Essay 1. Thank you for joining with me and for your patience. You can always mute this and just read along with me and just read yourself if you don't have the book yet. But thank you for your patience with my dog. Cameo 1, this is not a selfish gift, and I hope it blended together, but you can always mute it and just read it yourself. I love you. Thank you for joining.